record first. Alrighty, so this is the 3D printing 2 workshop. So I'm going to be briefly kind of going over what some basic things from the last one. But today I'm kind of going to be going a little more in depth into a little bit more of the specifics of 3D printing, like safety, filament types, and going into a little bit more detail into Cura, which is the slicing software I'll be using. So let me share my screen real quick. Alrighty, so this is the 3D printing 2, so it's hosted by CPP Hyperloop, IEEE, and CPP Robotics. So the agenda for today is we're gonna talk a little bit at just intro to what 3D printing is. We're gonna be talking about some 3D printing safety, some of the different filament types. Then we're gonna get into some printing customization. So I'm gonna grab like a pretty complex design and we're gonna go over some more of the settings and some of the support settings. And then I'm gonna talk about some of the tips and tricks I've learned in Cura. So So intro to 3D printing. So just a brief overview of what 3D printing is. 3D printing is a type of manufacturing process that creates a physical object from a digital model file. Usually an STL file is what's created from your model file. And 3D printing, they basically how they work is they add layer upon layer of a material till the object is complete. So it kind of starts with the first layer, and then as you can kind of see it in this picture here, it kind of just keeps slowly building upwards. So some of the software that you can kind of use for 3D printing for creating your design include SolidWorks and then any of kind of the Autodesk stuff. So like AutoCAD, Fusion 360, or Tinkercad. Fusion 360 is free for students for a year if you make the account with your school email, and then Tinkercad is just free. There's just not as many design options as there would be in like AutoCAD, SolidWorks, and Fusion 360. So kind of continuing into software is slicing. So slicing is taking your 3D model, which is in usually the STL file format, and you're slicing it into individual layers. So these individual layers are generated for the toolpath of the 3D printer, usually in the GCode file. So it'll take this GCode file and then that's what it'll start printing. So I'll kind of go over some of the slicing in Cura, which is the one I'll be using today. I also have a Prusa printer, so sometimes I've used the Prusa slicer. And just, I guess, some overall 3D printing safety stuff is number one, watch out for any burn risks. Most like the filament when you're printing it has to get up to about like 215 to 220 degrees. So that's definitely really easy to burn yourself with. It definitely cools really fast, but as it's coming out of the machine, it's definitely really hot. And even just like the nozzle itself, like if you're ever cleaning or kind of doing any maintenance after printing, the nozzle is what's probably going to be hotter than the filament itself. So always be careful when you're kind of working not to burn yourself. Same with the build plate. The build plate doesn't get as hot, but depending on what settings you have it as, it can get really hot. And don't fall for any pinch point injuries. So most 3D printers usually do like a calibration of some sort. And if you're kind of like doing some last minute things for the print, there's a chance that you can get pinched, because I know the printer I have, when it goes through its calibration, it does like an up down movement. I've yet to pinch myself because I'm usually pretty careful about that, but it can definitely start moving a little faster than you think it does. And be extra careful with scrapper blades. So these are usually kind of the tool you would use to get something off the 3D printer bed. So these, I actually cut myself kind of a while ago because I wasn't being super careful. Because these are really sharp. So always be careful taking your prints off the bed. Um, Depending on if you're adding some extra adhesion to it, it definitely can get a lot harder to take off. So you'll usually put in a little extra work, but sometimes that you have to be careful with that. And not that many people really know about this, but you should always try to avoid electric shocks from your printer. Depending on the kind you have, a lot of the electronic like components and wires are pretty bare, so they're not super heavily covered. So if you're not careful, you can accidentally like touch something, or if something's exposed, you can get a shock from that. So I just always be careful for where your wires are, or if you ever need to, you can always kind of like tape them up with some conductive tape to avoid that. Another thing to be aware of is to avoid any risk of fire. It's the 3D printer is just like a very like big machine that can definitely get kind of hot. So if something ever goes wrong, or depending on where you have it stored, there's a good chance it may catch fire. So wherever you end up setting up your 3D printer, make sure it's not next to a bunch of things that are flammable. And it usually should kind of be a little bit out of the way so that I guess some things are less likely to happen. And also be careful removing any support structures from finished prints. Depending on what kind of supports you have, they can be really easy or really hard to take off. Um, and you're usually using like knives, pliers, some like filing material or some filing tools too to kind of take those supports off. I usually use like a knife to get a lot of the supports off and to kind of like clean it. So always be careful when you're using any knives or those kind of things when you're removing support structures. A lot of them can come off really easily, and a lot of them do take a lot of work. So be careful when you're taking those off. Because it's like printed plastic, so when you kind of take off the supports, they're usually in pretty sharp pieces. And then lastly, be aware from any dangerous fumes coming from the PLA. Always try and make sure if you're running your 3D printer that it has a good amount of ventilation, or it just isn't in a place where the fumes will kind of like fill the air up, because most of the fumes from 3D printer filament can be pretty toxic. And then continuing kind of like talking about it, they're the 3D printing filaments kind of go in with a little bit of the safety tips. So PLA is usually kind of the standard like 3D printing filament people start with. So it's eco-friendly, it's odorless, and it's usually really easy to print with. And it's usually easier to recycle with too. I don't have it on here, but you can recycle your PLA. And if you have, I think it's an extruder, you can kind of crush down your old PLA prints, like of any like extra supports or anything, and kind of get that re-melted down into a new filament, which is kind of like the eco-friendly part. And then there's ABS, which is impact resistant and really durable. Um, my roommate works for a company where he has to remake designs and then 3D print them to test them. And he says that he usually uses ABS because it's really durable, so it's a lot easier to do testing with, and you're less likely to break whatever part you just printed. And there's also PETG, which is kind of the best of both worlds of PLA and ABS. So it's eco-friendly and can be odorless and easy to print with, and it can be really durable, which is nice. Alrighty, so now we're gonna start getting into some of the printing customizations. So let's see. Let's see. So this is Cura. So I grabbed just kind of like there's a website called Thingiverse that kind of has pre-created like cool models like this. that you can kind of download and print. So this is a pretty like complex design model, where you definitely have to put in a lot more settings than just being like, okay, I want to print. So I grabbed this file. So right now it's kind of blurred out in gray and this yellow, which means that it won't be fitting on the bed. So I'll have to kind of make some edits. So if you kind of look down, you can kind of see this is the print bed. I have a Prusa i3 MK3. So it already kind of, it's nice because Cura already kind of presets this bed and everything with the exact dimensions that your printer would have. So you don't have to worry too much about sizing because this will kind of tell you if what you have can fit. I usually just have generic PLA, but if you ever needed to, you can always change it to whichever one you have, like ABS. There's a lot more printing filaments up here that you can use. And then kind of over here is just some basic print settings. I'll kind of be going over those after I finish fixing this so it'll fit on the print bed. So going over, I guess, some of the movements is if you click on your model and look over here, this is the move. So I can kind of move this around. So as you can see, even though I move it, it still doesn't really fit. So I'm going to make it smaller. So I can make this model smaller by clicking over here on the scale. So these are its original dimensions of its XYZ. So if I wanted to, so this is it at 100% scale of the model, but since I have to make it smaller, I can change this number to 80 and it'll fix, it's nice because Cura will usually fix all the numbers for you. And you can also kind of slide to make it bigger too if you didn't want to put in a specific number, but I'm just gonna keep it at 80. And then I can kind of move it around again, see if it fits. I'm getting kind of close. One thing I would maybe just have to do next is rotate it, which is what we're going to be doing next. So there's also a rotate option. So you can either do like a snap rotation. So if you click on like the select face, if this was maybe something more flat, if I just clicked on this, it'll kind of do it for me. But that doesn't really work too much with this. So I can click on the bottom again and it'll put me in the right place. But some prints may be in a different angle, but if you want to print it at a specific angle or in a way to design your supports, you can do that as well. Let's see. So I've kind of rotated it a little bit to the side, so maybe I can get it to fit. And now I've gotten it to fit. So because this is all yellow now, it means I'm good to print this. So now I'm kind of going to go over some of these print settings. So these are the profile defaults. You can kind of edit these to your choosing. Usually this means kind of, I guess, like the nozzle. So like how high the bed will raise when you're printing. So the larger the number, the more space there's going to be between each, I guess, each layer. So usually you would use some of these bigger values, like the point, anything between like 0.2 to 0.6 is more draft or extra fast. Anything that has less of a layer will always be faster, but it definitely won't have a nicer quality. So if you were kind of just doing this to test out like what a part would look like, you would probably want to run it on one of these settings. If not, if you're kind of just doing it to make something look nice, I usually stick around like the 0.15 for normal. Personally, I haven't found that much of a difference with the fine and the normal, so I usually just keep it at normal. But if you wanted something in like very fine, you would use some of the smaller values for it. And then over here is kind of just infill percentage. So infill is how much filament would be inside the model. So the bigger number you go, the more, I guess, the more of the inside of this would be filled. So usually for something that you want to be really sturdy, especially with PLA, you would run it definitely at a bigger infill. Most prints though, for decent like durability, usually 20 is about like a good number. I'll usually print stuff like around 10 to 20 depending on what it is. And there's also options for adhesion and support. So supports are, if I just kind of try to print this layer by layer, it probably wouldn't go too well for me because it starts from bottom to top. So kind of you can see in the red, this is definitely where I would need some supports, because if I didn't have any support or adhesion and I just sliced this, let's see, sometimes the slicing takes a little while. But for something like this, that kind of an overhang and doesn't have anything beneath it to build off of, this wouldn't be a viable print if I just printed it by itself. So I've sliced it. Down here kind of tells me what or how long the print would take. So in this case, it would be 14 hours. And then I can kind of read here and it tells me some more specifications, kind of like how long the infill would take, how long the inner outer walls will take. I have retractions enabled and I'll kind of talk about that later too. So that adds a little bit more time. And then the skin is like the outer layer. And then some travel time is added there too. So this is all in hours. So like 7:31, it's 7 hours and 31 minutes of infill time. Inner walls is like about 54 minutes, outer walls an hour 30. And kind of just goes down the line. It also tells me how much filament I'll be using in grams and meters, because most spools are usually about 1K to maybe like smallest I found is like 200. But usually the 1K is like, you don't have to worry too much about this number. But now to kind of, I guess, show the slice layering for this. So this is just like reprocessing the layers so I can see them. So if I just had my print like this is the exact code and build that the G-code would tell the 3D printer to go through. So as I can kind of see through here, as I kind of go lower and lower, you'd see how the arm wouldn't even be attached to the build. Like the arm would start here, but there isn't anything to support this. Like it would definitely spit out the filament, but it would kind of just be floating into nothingness and wouldn't actually print. And then I'll zoom in here so you can see. So this is like the infill. So this is with 20%. So this is still pretty infilled. I use a gyro infill. So it kind of like goes in like a gyro direction, you can kind of see. But something like this would definitely need supports that can't print just like this. So this is where you would kind of add you would enable like the support. And then I usually always use adhesion for the most part, because I've had a couple prints where there hasn't been enough, and the print it'll still print, but it'll shift so slightly over. Oh yeah, and then so to answer Addie's question, the higher the infill, the denser the model. So I'll kind of show you with like, so this was at 20% infill. So if I run this at 80% and I reslice it, the slicing usually takes a little longer, the more time and like I guess the more work the printer will have to do. But that's usually with just the bigger models. Usually smaller models, the slicing's really quick. But yeah. Cura is, I think, probably one of also the more user-friendly slicers that I've used. The Prusa slicer I mentioned earlier is a little more difficult to customize with. Kind of like by like removing supports and stuff like that, it's a little hard to tell where everything is. But I think Cura is a lot better, and you can definitely play around with more of the settings, like changing temperature, changing the support type, which is nice. Alrighty, I'll wait for this to finish slicing. And then I'll kind of go over some more of the support customization stuff. Let's see. So as you can see, it's still processing the layers, but adding this 80% to the infill, I think the old print time was like 14 hours. So with all the added infill, it's now 3 days, 3 hours, and 35 minutes. And I think it almost tripled the amount of filament it used. I think before it was only 122 grams, and now it's like 400. So definitely the more infill, the denser the model. It'll also be the longer the print time. I think. Okay, so you can kind of see with like this is the infill with 80%. So this is pretty much almost all filled in. And as I kind of go layer by layer, it's still there. But these kind of blue things that have just popped up, so the ones creating this little blue infill lines, not infill lines, but blueprint lines on the floor are adhesion. So this will kind of help everything stick to the bed better, and there's a lot less chance of something moving. And these little blue zigzag lines are the supports. So as you kind of go up, before when the hand would start, it didn't have anything to go off of, but you can kind of see this almost follows the same design as the arm. So as the print continues to go, this would follow with it. And then it would be able to like hold this very first layer of the hand and then continue to support it. So by the end of this, most of the hand would be pretty well supported. But it would definitely be a little bit of work to take this off, but having the extra supports is, I think, always worth it. And then as you keep going up, you see it's kind of goes through. So at the finish of all of it, there's pretty much supports surrounding like the whole thing, except this back part. Let's see. I'm gonna just make this smaller just so getting the reprint slice, or I guess the new slices from it, will be a lot easier. And then I'll put this to 10%. Let's see. But so this would kind of be a little more of a desk model. So how does one remove adhesion and support with knives and blades? So let's see if I have one of the parts with me right now. Let me see. It's usually kind of like a scraper tool that you use to kind of just like, it's really, I mean, the one I have that I prefer to use is kind of like a spatula. Like if you were using it for cooking, you would kind of just like get underneath the adhesion, because for this, it's a really easy because it's only one layer. Like, so this would be the very bottom layer, and you can see it kind of just generates the toolpath for that. But since this is one layer, it's really easy to just like scoop under it and take it off. And support with the knives and blades. Oh, actually, I think I have something printed where I have to remove some of the supports. So I'll show you guys how to do that at the end of the video. But this is kind of just the generated toolpath for all of it. You can kind of see, like, if you wanted to see how the first layer would be printing, or each layer by layer, you can kind of go through this and it shows you. So it usually makes the adhesion layer first, then goes into making these little like support lines, and then doing the very first layer of the print. All of these usually go with building the supports and everything around it, then the actual build. And so let me do this. So this is something that for the most part needs all of these supports, but maybe right here I wouldn't need it, because if I kind of look at the prepare model, it's not too much out there. So it could still probably print that and still look okay. Or even right here, you can see there's like the smallest bit of red, but I think in the preview, it still has a little bit of support kind of almost going to it here, I think. But let's say like you have something like this and you're like, I don't want the supports here. So if I go to this one, support blocker, I can put a support block like right here. So this would mean that when I did this modeling later, it won't do the supports there anymore. So if I reslice this, can you print a single model with multiple types of color filament? If yes, would you need separate files? For those, it depends. I only have a single extruder on mine, but some prints already have like you can make it so that you would start the print in one color, and then whenever it would go to the next color, you would just pause the print and swap out the colors. Or you would kind of take the original print, have it print all the one color, and then there would sometimes be spaces for the second color, and then you would kind of just like reprint it with that new one. Or you can build them separately and like put them together. Like, I don't know if, no, you can't see that, but let's see. So like for this, like I didn't print it in two colors, but like I print both files separately and then like put them together. Let's see. Same with like these. Like I have like little Pokeballs printed, but they were printed in like all different colors, and then I was able to just build them together. But it just depends. There's a lot of printers that are dual, they're like dual extrusion. So that's where you would be able to do like a multicolored print, and it would kind of just swap between the colors itself. But going back to this, so where I had that blocking here, there's no longer any supports there. So if you ever need to take off any supports, this is the tool you would use. But I usually kind of keep the supports because I don't think they're too hard to take off. Like I think having more supports is better than less. But let's see. This is kind of just like mirroring if you needed to like change how it looked. I usually kind of just do all the movement here because I think it's a little easier to like control. And then this stuff is like per model settings. If you wanted to, like, let's say like I didn't have a support like on the back, but I maybe wanted to put one there, I can add something here and print things as a support. This would mostly be if you had like multiple files. Like if you added like an additional file here, you could print it as a support instead of an actual file. Let's see. But now I guess kind of going into more of the customization for printing. This is, I think, where you would probably go for like that dual extrusion or the dual like colors. If you like, these are kind of like the basic ones. So like the layer height, this is where you could specify it because on these kind of basic settings, you can't really put in a specific number. But if you went into some of the more customized settings, there's definitely a lot more. So I could like change this layer height to 0.1 if I wanted to. I could play with the walls, like the wall thickness if I wanted them to be more, like if I wanted that outside skin layer to be more thick. I can also play with the infill here. There's a bunch of different infill types that you can use too. I just prefer gyroid, so that's why I use it. Kind of go through this. Like for me, usually before I would print everything on a 60-degree bed, but I was having a lot of adhesion problems. So I changed this number to 63 and it definitely helped a lot. And same with like the printing temperature. It used to be a lot more stringy when I was printing it at 220. And I just lowered the degrees by 5. And this, like for me, this is like my ideal print settings, but you can always edit these if you'd like. You can also kind of go through the speed. Like if you wanted to really speed up the print, you would make this number bigger. And this is kind of like the retraction stuff. So I also enabled this to kind of help with the adhesion because the retraction kind of makes it so that when it's kind of moving and it isn't printing, it kind of sucks up some of that filament because usually when it heats up, a lot of it trickles down, but enabling retraction allows it to not kind of hit, or like if that little extra filament's popping out, it's less likely to like move and hit the build. And I also have the Z hop when retracted. So when it's going to a new place, it goes up a little bit and then moves instead of kind of just going straight to the new position. And that's kind of where the printer will kind of hit the build. And then you can kind of going over the cooling speed too, if you'd like. I've never really played with this because I haven't had any cooling issues. But this is kind of like the support, like you can do touching build plate everywhere because some builds are from the build plate up, but they can also be from like a specific part in the builds kind of building up with that. So you can kind of play around with the supports. And down here is like that dual extrusion part. There might not be any settings, but let's see. Oh, well, my printer doesn't have a dual extrusion, so I can't really like play with that. But doing like a dual color with a different, or with only a single nozzle printer, you would kind of have to do some research and make your designs fit that. And then, so you would want to increase the wall thickness to increase the structural integrity. Yeah. So, let's see, in the preview, as you can kind of see, oh, I have to reslice this. But I'll like play with the, like for the wall thickness, so it's at 1, if I made this like 3, the very like, I guess it would be kind of like the shell. So the wall is kind of, I guess, like the shell of the print. If you wanted that, like if you, yeah, like if to increase the structural integrity, I would make that bigger. So I think, so if you can like see, so I think before the wall was literally just like almost a single line, but now the wall is like very thick. So this would, so you could even maybe go with a smaller infill size if you made the wall bigger. But I'm gonna change this back to 1. So if I put it back to 1, which is like the normal size, I think it'll only be about like a singular layer around it. Yeah. Yeah, so now it's kind of just this thin layer. What else? Oh, and then a little more into the supports. You can also, just like with Infill, you can kind of change the type. So on here, so support pattern, you can do like zigzag lines, gyroid. I usually just use zigzags because they're a little easier to take off for me personally. Because I can kind of just, usually how I take them off is I can kind of grab like the starter point, and if I just pull, they all kind of just like come off pretty nicely. Since they're just like this, like you kind of stretch them and they just move. But sometimes if it's surrounding the whole build, it's a little harder to do. There's also a tree support. This is probably one of the easier supports to take off, since it's a very like thin type of support. It's the only thing with it though is depending on the print, the walls might not be as, or I guess like the support walls might not be as thick, so it might not print that nicely, but the supports are like a lot easier to take off than some of the normal ones. Let's see. So a tree one would look like this. So it's a lot more like all together versus like the zigzags. But the only, I guess, negative part is how like the supports finish is kind of very like crumpled together. So when you're taking it off, it can sometimes leave like a weird feeling or like brittle pieces on the top, but you can always kind of play around with those to, and like scuff them out with, I usually use like sand, like the sanding paper stuff. And then like depending on like how much I want to take off, I'll like increase the, I forget what it's called, but the, like when you increase, I guess like how brittle the sand is on the paper, depending on how much I want to take off, I'll use like a one that's has more of those like pieces. The grit, yes, the grit, thank you. But yeah, that's pretty much it. Like Cura definitely has a lot more settings depending on what kind of printer you have, or I guess like the more complex the printer, the more settings you can probably play around with. But I usually kind of just play with the like the retraction and the support settings. I haven't really played with any of the other ones yet, but let's see. But I'll go into, I guess, kind of playing around with like a printed part and going over how to take off some of the material from it. so. I don't have like a camera type stand, but I think this might work. Let's see. I feel like this is a little hard to tell, but this is like so this is like I think one of the wheel covers that our design team made. So I printed a couple of them, and these have like, so you can kind of see, but this way, the very like thin layers, that is like the adhesion layer. So it prints kind of just like flat on the bed, and you can use like usually like a tool like this. You can kind of just like slide underneath and keep kind of just like prying at it till it pops off the bed, and then you're able to take it off. But usually the adhesion's really easy to like tear apart. Like if I just pull, it'll come off. And then I like, this is with those zigzag supports down here. So for something like that, I'd probably first go with seeing if I can just pull some of them off. Something like this. I'd also recommend if you're getting something to 3D print with, especially if you're going to be using a knife, is using like something like this. I kind of just purchased on Amazon like a 3D printing like starter kit. And it gave me like all the tools I needed, like all of this, like the knives and anything else I'd need. But I usually use this to kind of do any like cutting, so I don't like cut my desk and not my hands either. But there's like, so in this one, you can't really tell, but there's supports in these small holes, and there's supports just on the bottom. So I think if I can pull this off, I usually kind of like twist to get some of the starting supports off and then just try and pull them off. But if they're a little more stuck, kind of have to pull harder. Or I can use like, or sometimes like I'll use a knife, like one of these like small ones, and then the packet gave me came with like a bunch of extra blades, so I can kind of just like dig on the bottom to try and like loosen the support, or I guess like that small layer in between, and try pulling again. Here we go. But yeah. So like these ones are kind of like, now that I got like that first one done, I can kind of just keep grabbing the same place and just pulling till I get it all off. There we go. So some of these came off pretty easy, but this is the part that needed the support, was underneath here. And so all the support was like underneath this part. There you go. But it was kind of just like this part right here. So I took all the supports off of here, and some of these holes also needed a bit of support. Yeah, does Cura come with a 3D printer, or do you have to get it separately? So Cura is a free like software for slicing. So Cura is the slicing software. But that's free. Like you don't have to use Cura. There's other ones like the Prusa one that I was talking about. Let's see. Let me pull it up. There we go. Like this one here would be like a different slicer one. So this is like the Prusa slicer. So same kind of thing. It has like the build plate. But some of the print settings, like there's expert, advanced, simple. So simple, you don't really have much options, but in advanced, you can kind of play around with like some more of these settings. But this is just the slicer. So Prusa slicer is also free. But let's see. Yeah, no problem. But yeah, I think most 3D printers are compatible with Cura. I think my coworker who just got like a 3D printer, he's the one who introduced me to Cura, and he was like showing me all the settings, and I was like, that's a lot better than the one I was using, so I now use Cura. But I think Cura is compatible with almost any kind of printer. But yeah, so I used into using like the X-Acto knife, you can kind of like take some of these holes out if you can, but these ones are kind of hard to take out. Let's see. Also, I don't know if you guys can kind of tell, but there's like a bit of like stringiness on the print. So this is with a pretty like cheap PLA material. So usually the cheaper the PLA, is the lower quality it is. Like it's kind of hard to tell, but there's like little like stringy pieces. So this is also like if the printer's too hot, like I think the settings I maybe have it at are a little too high for this. So it causes that like stringing, but the strings are pretty easy to like take off. So I usually kind of just keep my settings the same. But for holes like this, you probably have to play around with the knives a little more. But some of like the other tools that you can use, or at least like one tool like especially that I think is really useful, is if you don't have one, is like a dial caliper. This is more for the design process, but you can like, if I wanted to see like, oh, like how thick this was, I'd be able to like hold it in the middle and it would tell me. Mine's currently dead right now, so I can't show you guys the values, but that's what the dial caliper is used for. And there's also some tools like this, which is like a curved blade. So if I wanted to like make an edit to something like uh, something like this that like I printed, there's still a little bit of adhesion like on the sides, and if I wasn't able to like take that off with my hand, I can kind of like make it a little smoother by just like rolling out some of the like excess pieces that are on the sides. So this one, I usually like this one to like clean up any like side materials, or if I want to like smooth something out so it's not super sharp, I can use this to kind of keep cutting down the material. And then something like this too is always good. This is like a mini filer, so like some of the supports left like a little bit of a mark. It's not like too much, but if it was something like really sticking out, I'd want to like play around with this and just like smooth it down so it's a little easier. Like I think I smoothed this one down a little bit so it's a little nicer to touch. But yeah, do you guys have, I guess, any other questions about like the after print stuff, like how to do anything? That's all I had. But if you guys have any questions, did you make any designs? It kind of depends. If it's something I'm not super like familiar making, or if it's something that I just wanted to print, I'll show you guys. Like this is the website I usually use. Like if I want to, like I work with kids, and we kind of like to teach them about different kinds of like 3D printing stuff. I use like a pretty popular site is called like Thingiverse. Like, or like if I ever tell my friends and I'm like, oh, like do you guys want anything, like I'll usually send them this, and there's like pre-made designs. Like this is where I got the Spider-Man one. Like they have like the Squid Game doll. Like this is something you would like put together. um but I'll link it in the chat if any of you have like a 3D printer and like don't know where to like look for STL files. But like for this one, like if I wanted to make this ornament squirrel, like I would kind of read the details to see like what it needs. Like it usually tells me if I need supports or not. And then it'll give me a couple files. I usually just, the STL file is the one you're gonna want to download. But I usually kind of use this. If I ever like want something specific, like I think I made a couple like coasters that like I wanted with specific designs like on Fusion 360, and then I would just like make that into an STL file and print that. But for some stuff like fun things that I just want to print, I'll usually just use Thingiverse. Any other questions from anyone? Yeah, if there are any more questions, that's pretty much all I had. But thank you guys for coming. For anyone who doesn't know, what's the IIL? The SIIL. What is that like a club? Student innovation and oh yeah. There's I forget where the training is, but I think you can email someone for that and I think, right, Addie, you can get access to the labs that way with your ID card. I think there's also a club you might be able to join, and I think most of their members are given access through that as well. Oh, cool. Yeah, so I guess like for anyone still here, so you can sign up on the website for the Student Innovation and Idea Labs, and you can get added to the training and do it on Canva. All right. Thank you, Caesar. And thank you, I guess, everyone who stayed till the end. But that's pretty much all I had. You guys are good to go. If you have any more questions, I can answer any questions you have. Alrighty. Bye, Addie. Caesar or Omar, did you guys? Oh, okay. Bye, Omar. See, did you have any questions, Caesar? How much did you pay for a good starter 3D printer? Um, I think the one I currently have is pretty expensive because it's one bought with some of our club funds for like manufacturing for like the parts we need. But I think any other part or printer, maybe around like like anything between like maybe 2 to 300 would be like if you wanted good quality, I'd say between like 2 to 300. But it's honestly a pretty good investment to put a little more money into it, because you can kind of make almost whatever you want. Like you can make like I've definitely made like a couple like headphone stands or like phone stands, so I like never have to buy them. But that's usually like a good price range. The one for the club, the Prusa, let's see, I 3. I think this one was about, oh, so this was like a $700 one. But I know usually Prusas are a little more expensive. They have like some cheaper ones around like 3 to 400, but a lot of the Ender ones are also really good. And those are usually a little cheaper. Like I think the Ender 3D printers. Yeah. Ender. Yeah. It also depends because sometimes also if you get like a more enclosed one, those are usually more expensive. But I think the free open ones are like just as good. Like I just found like an Ender 3 printer that's around like 200, but the Ender printers are pretty good quality. Yeah. It just kind of I guess depends on what kind, but and also if you want it like enclosed or not. But I usually think the one I have is like an open one, and I think it's okay. Um, but I guess depending on like what you want the printer to be able to do, how big is how much you would spend. But usually 2 to 300 is about like a good number for like a starter one, especially if it's just you paying for it. Yeah, no problem. Yeah, if you ever also have like any questions about like 3D printing, or if you want like an opinion for which one to buy, if you like find a couple, feel free to ask in like the general questions for the Hyperloop Discord, and someone there might like will probably answer and give you some pointers if you like, or if you ever like need, or if you buy one and just need any like help setting up, you can probably message someone and someone can probably hop on and help you. Yeah. Thanks for staying till the end, Caesar. Much appreciated. Alrighty. See ya. Thank you. Alrighty. And then I guess for anyone watching the video on YouTube, if you have any questions about any 3D printing related things, feel free to join the Discord here. Here's the QR code, here's the Discord, or follow us on Instagram if you'd like and ask us any questions about anything. Alrighty, thank you.